In the last series, I spoke almost entirely about love and loving and compassion and giving and receiving of love. In this series, I'm going to talk about some things that are a little bit more necessary and maybe not so positive. I will try to offer you a positive twist to these things. Today, I want to talk about control, something that we all deal with every day, either in people or in structure or in our political climate or whatever it may be. We as human beings, we grow up in an environment, whether it's healthy or it's unhealthy, in which we are learning about control. We are being controlled or taught, which can be viewed as control depending on the type of teaching, from the beginning, from the time we're old enough to walk and talk. We're being told what to do, what not to do, the whole thing. And as we mature, depending on the amount of control that we are exposed to, whether we want to or not, whether it's healthy for us or not, we begin to develop a need to control people, places, things. And this is, unhealthy, to say the least, and has some pretty severe consequences in our adulthood. Now, we all know that when we have children and, the children are growing and so forth and so on, as a parent, we need to, obviously love and nurture and control or create boundaries for our children so that they grow into relatively healthy adults and participate in this world fully and from a healthy standpoint. The issue with control or being raised in an environment where there was an excessive amount of control, and by that I mean control that comes from a place of anger or a place of hate even. We tend to try as adults to control things that are simply beyond our control. So what happens? Well, the first thing that happens to us when we attempt to control things, a person, for instance, that is not controllable because it isn't our job, we become frustrated as human beings. So our attempt to control is futile because it is beyond our control or power to control someone else. As a result of this limit, we become frustrated, we become disinterested in the person, we become angry at both ourselves for our inability to control that which we can't, and with the person that we're having control issues with. So these things are extremely common. They're very unhealthy and they're hurtful, and people want to move away from those of us that have control issues, or we grew up in an environment where control and controlling personalities were very prevalent. So we need to be very, very careful about control. Now, in my own life, I can tell you for sure that I grew up in an unbelievably toxic, controlling environment. And so as I matured into an adult, of course, I became an expert at the false hope, the deep-rooted false hope that I could control. And as a result, I was miserable. I was absolutely a miserable, angry human being. So as I matured and so forth and so on, lo and behold, Keith is lonely. Keith has very few, if any, authentic friends. Keith is, participating in some activities that are not good for Keith, and all because of this deep desire, unconscious really, desire to control or judge others. And so the point of this podcast today is to open our eyes to the possibility that we as individuals may have some control issues that we simply aren't aware of. We're just simply not aware. We were taught this way, we behave this way. So controlling people, if you're not a controlling person, if you're a participant and you're loving and you're kind and you're giving, we tend to do what we're supposed to do. We move away from that controlling entity, whether it's a wife or a husband or an aunt or whoever it is, because no one wants to be controlled, especially if toxicity and anger is involved. The other thing about controlling people that are controlling, is that they're very manipulative. They will do and say just about anything to get their way. Now, I'm speaking from experience here. I'm not that way today, thank God. But there was a time in my own life when I was very much addicted to or breathing for the reason of controlling others, people, situations, and so on. So the foundational reason, or one of them, there's going to be several, of course, because we're all a little bit different. The foundational reason for people's need to control is really two things. It's, were we taught about control? Were we the victim of a controlling personality? And the other thing that lays between us, inside of ourselves, is a small inferiority issue. We do not feel of value to ourselves or to others. We are not comfortable in our own skin. We are not feeling peaceful, and we are not feeling these things because we are fearful. Inferiority transforms into a need for control. And as a result of that, we start with unhealthy, and unhealthy breeds more unhealthy in the form of a need to control. So if we understand that inferiority is one of the foundational reasons for people that need to control, how do we change this? Well, in my first series, which is about love and loving, I speak very openly and often about loving ourselves. And so if you are a person, just between you and me, we're just people, and you have a control issue or you think you might, listening to the love series is going to allow you the opportunity to generate love for yourself based on fact. So letting go of control, in my own life, what I did is whenever I had a controlling thought or I was trying to interfere or interject my feelings or my will onto a situation that I may not have needed to participate in at all, I simply was aware that this was a controlling effort. And I stopped and I watched and I listened, because I don't need to raise my voice to prove that I'm wrong, right? So I just stopped doing controlling things and controlling behaviors. Now, this was a process, folks. This was not a light switch kind of a gig, and it took time. But what I noticed for sure was that people began to return to my life. I began to acquire friends. I began to acquire better relationships. And so growing out of anything that we don't want to be, right? I've talked about becoming the person you want to be, not the person you've been taught to be, is a process. Now, I'm telling you, folks, this is worth it. So growing out of control starts with understanding I have a problem with control, and then using the first series of loving that I did as a framework for learning to love ourselves. This releases us from the bondage of what we were taught. This is Keith Kale.